denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance are the original 5 stages as quoted by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler. But again, my experience is that if we can just take from that, all emotions are welcome as a part of grief. It's not just what we typically classify as negative emotion. You do not have to be in denial. You don't have to be angry. You don't have to bargain, right? You don't have to do any of those things, but use it as a way to say, okay, all of it is okay. And it is so much more than that.
This is episode number 561 with Krista St-Germain. And we're going to be talking about how trauma can actually help you grow. Hi, everybody. I'm Sandy Weiner, and welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. And to support you on your journey to lasting love, I wrote 2 books. The first one is really about core confidence, and it's called Becoming a Woman of Value, How to Thrive in Life and Love. And it's divided into 3 pillars of core confidence: to show up, stand up, and speak up. And the second book is Choice Points in Dating. And this book just came out on Valentine's Day this year. And it is a book to help empower women to make healthier decisions in love. We often make choices that do not support our well-being, and it's no fault of our own. It's just a lack of information. And so I break it down from how we choose, who we choose, and how we know whether to stay or go, and all the good stuff. So it's basically a handbook for dating. If you are interested in them, that you can find both these books on Amazon for Kindle or paperback. And we always share a tip from the Woman of Value book. And this week's tip is step number 1. Love yourself first. A lot of people misunderstand what that means. And I want to say that to me, it means to really have kindness and compassion for yourself, know what your core values are, know what you stand for, and don't betray yourself when you're out there dating, because we often will see something, we'll dismiss it, we will stay with people who don't honor and respect us. And so my challenge to you this week is to find a place within yourself that maybe you are dismissing or rejecting, and to give that part a little more love. And before I bring Krista on, I just want to invite you, if you're not yet a member, to join my amazing Facebook group. We are almost at 4,000 women at this point, and this is a group that cares. We monitor, we actually engage, and we don't just set up a group and dismiss it, leave it. It is really important when you're dating to have good support. And most of the groups for single women that are out there are not monitored. They are just a place to come and complain. And this is not what we do. We do the opposite. So if you're looking for a place of support, come and join us at your last first date. And now for my guest, Krista St-Germain. She is a master's certified life coach, a post-traumatic growth and grief expert. She is a widow and the host of the Widowed Mom podcast. When her husband was killed by a drunk driver in 2016, her life was completely flipped upside down, which is totally understandable. After therapy helped her uncurl from the fetal position, she discovered life coaching, post-traumatic growth, and she learned the tools she needed to move forward that she now teaches to other people. So we're so happy to have you here, Krista.
Well, thanks for having me. I always love it when people want to talk about grief and post-traumatic growth, because it's not everyone's favorite topic.
Well, I have gone through it myself. I lost a child at the age of 5. And so I know grief very well.
Yeah.
And I know how misunderstood grief is. I know how much we can grow with the proper support. And I've also coached a lot of widows and widowers who are struggling with the same things that you've gone through. So I'm sorry for your loss. That must have been shocking and completely dysregulating. I can't even imagine that kind of, wow, immediate gone, no warning. So senseless, the drunk driving.
Yeah, but what I chose to believe about that is it happened on, a Sunday at 5:30. So it's daylight. And my thought about that driver is your life is not going well. Things are hard when you're putting meth and alcohol in your system and getting behind the wheel of a car at 5:30 on a Sunday, you're hurting, right? So I don't think it was intentional. Not that that makes it okay, but it was much easier to find peace when I thought about it that way. I don't think life was going good for him,
Yeah, I mean, that's a
Yeah.
beautifully compassionate way to look at it, and probably brings you a lot more sense of peace than just being angry, because
Yeah,
there's nothing you can do about what happened except
exactly.
how you choose to grieve and move forward.
Yep.
So let's talk about grief. Why do people really struggle so much with grief?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the main reasons we struggle is not what people expect it to be. One of the main reasons we struggle is that we think we understand grief, right? Because we've heard of the 5 stages, and that's all we know about grief. And while the 5 stages in its time started some valuable conversations, it really wasn't ever even about the study of what happens when you lose someone, right? It was an anecdotal study on hospice patients who were coming to terms with their own loss. And so people have taken that, which there was again so much value in its day, and then tried to apply it to what we experience in grief. And there are some useful aspects to it, but it was never really intended to be formulaic or linear. It was never, even Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her later years wrote about her own frustration with how her own work was interpreted. We don't want to measure ourselves against stages when really grief isn't something that even ever ends, right? It's the natural response to a perceived loss. We're always going to have a response. We're always going to have thoughts and feelings. So, but we live in a culture that kind of seems to think we're supposed to go through this linear progression. There's a productive way to do it. There's a right or wrong way to do it. And if we do it the right way, we'll get over it. And, something kind of magical happens at about the 1 year point is what we tend to think. And that's not what matches our lived experience. And if that's all you know about grief, then of course, it's no surprise that we're all very frustrated when what we thought was going to happen isn't at all what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have heard about the 5 stages of grief being misleading, and it's not linear at all. Grief is up, it's down, you're happy, you're angry, you're bargaining, you're shocked, you go back to
Mm-hmm.
anger, right? It's the human experience. And I think something I've learned through coaching people through dating and relationships is most things are not linear. Most things are not formula based. We can't live our life based on one size fits all, because that's not what we are as humans. We are not one size fits all. We are all unique in the way that we experience life. And I can imagine that people feel like they failed grief because at 1 year they're not over it.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, one of my clients who is widowed was doing really well, and then she went on a family vacation about a year after her husband died, and her kids were having a really hard time being without their father, and she was having a
Mm-hmm.
really hard time. And so it was a whole new experience that brought up feelings again. And these
Sure.
things happen.
Yes.
So if you can talk about what are the 5 stages of grief, and what people can then do instead of
Well, again, I
following them.
am only a fan of the 5 stages as a jumping off point. So,
Mhm.
denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance are the original 5 stages as quoted by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler. But again, my experience is that yes, if we can just take from that, all emotions are welcome as a part of grief. It's not just what we typically classify as negative emotion. You do not have to be in denial. You don't have to be angry. You don't have to bargain, right? You don't have to do any of those things, but use it as a way to say, okay, all of it is okay. And it is so much more than that, right? And instead of thinking it, as you said earlier, as this linear, formulaic, staged progression, think of it more like a big squiggly line where, we feel like one day we're taking 2 steps forward and the next day grief grenade, and emotions are intense and we're experiencing more yearning, and it's not predictable. It's not, you're not doing it wrong if it doesn't feel like you're somehow feeling better every single day. And since we can't undo the loss, it's not going to end per se. Now, we will feel better typically, but we will always have thoughts and feelings about our loved one. And of course, grief is not just death loss as well. We could talk about non-death loss. It's not a problem to solve, right? All of these feelings that we feel. I think that's another reason we struggle so much, is because we've been sold this bill of goods that happiness is the goal, as opposed to being human is the goal, right? We think we're supposed to strive to feel good all the time instead of to allow ourselves to feel the full breadth and depth of all of the emotions that are available to us as humans. So if we can slow down and consider that, no, it's not a problem if I think of them when the holidays come, or, something in my environment reminds me of them and I feel sad. It's not a problem at all, right? It's not something that's broken. It doesn't mean I need to fix it. It's just part of grief. So no disrespect to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross or David Kessler. I do think their work is very valuable, but there are many, many other grief theories beside the 5 stages, and just people aren't talking about them.
So what are some of those theories?
One of the theories that I really like is called the dual process model of grief. The reason I like it, I think it just kind of meets us where we are. I'm a big fan of the both and. And basically what that theory teaches is that if we could take activities and the way that we live our lives and divide them into 2 buckets, if you will. So one bucket would be grief related, loss related activities. So we're thinking about the loss, we're allowing our feelings, we're doing the quote unquote work of grief. And then the other bucket of activities would be the restoration types of activities, the respite, the hobbies, not thinking about the loss, the actual living of life that is unrelated. And in this kind of productivity culture that we live in, and I did this to myself, which is probably why I like this theory so much, a lot of us tend to think, well, I need to be thinking about it. I need to be working on it. I need to be doing something. Otherwise, I'm going to do it wrong. And, I'll never feel better. And so we try to spend all of our time in this one bucket, of grief related activities. And then we shame ourselves when we go take a break from it. And we make it mean, well, I didn't love them enough, or I'm doing it wrong, or, I'm avoiding my healing, or I'm in denial. We have all these stories about what really are very healthy, restorative ways to spend time. And so what the dual process model teaches is that the healing is found in the intentional oscillation, back and forth, back and forth. So we spend some time thinking about the loss and doing the quote unquote work. And then we also take a healthy breaks, and we don't have to apologize for those breaks. And we don't want to shame ourselves for those breaks. They're actually a good, healthy part of healing. And we just go back and forth. And so I like that one because there's nowhere to go. There's no deadline. You can't do it wrong, right? It's the both and. It's, yes, I can think about my loss, and also I can take a break from that and do things that maybe bring me joy, right? Back and forth, back and forth.
I like that. It's just much more holistic and realistic because, I think one of the issues with the way that people heal often is they become obsessed with healing, and they negate everything else. Like I'm so immersed in my own healing, they become self-centered, they become just ignoring the rest of the world, and often your health can decline. Your hobbies aren't there anymore, the people in your life don't know how to relate to you or reach you, if all you're doing is talking about the grief. And I remember Brene Brown once talked about how we share our stories. And she said that you really need to process your story before you share it with an audience, because otherwise you're expecting the audience to help you heal. And I have heard people who have had loss talk from the stage, and you can tell the difference. You can tell somebody who's really healed and has worked through the process of grieving, and somebody who's still really raw. And it just feels like, oh my God, I have to go hug this person because they're so hurting. And so I think that's an important thing. And I can feel from your energy that you've done this work, like, that you continue to do this work because of the way that you're sharing.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, I think also a lot of the women that I tend to work with, because very often they're mothers, is that they will have kind of an opposite experience where, because they've got lives and households to run, right? And now they've gone from a 2-parent household to a 1-parent household. And so very often they find it difficult to give their grief any attention. And then they make themselves wrong for that, as opposed to figuring out how to be their own best champion and allow, for life, because they do need to be running the show and getting the kids where they need to be and making sure that the bills are paid and doing all of those things. And so if we could just lighten up a little bit and not think that there's some place we have to go and some way to fail or some right or wrong way, it all gets easier.
Yeah, and you have to feel your feelings. I was a champion at not feeling my feelings. I was married to somebody who completely shut down after the loss of our child. And he actually depended on the support of our 3-year-old daughter, which was really not okay. And I didn't even know it because I was in total survival mode, just trying to keep the house in order and keep the kids going. I had 2 young kids. And I remember years later, like after the divorce, my kids would say to me, "Mom, I never see you cry. Like, you are a rock, but we want to see you cry." And it was the beginning of really understanding vulnerability, because I had to keep it together, but I also had to show emotion, and I had to feel emotion. And so I think that the message that I would like to convey, and just kind of reiterate what you said, is that we're human and it's okay to feel all emotions. And we do not want our kids or anybody to think that we're just a rock, that we have no feelings, but also that we overfeel and that we consume all the energy in the room. It's finding that balance.
Yeah. I'm so glad you talk about that, because I agree with you. I do see a lot of worry about showing emotion. What does that mean? And, when you look at it from what is the child's perspective, if they never see us as humans, how do they learn emotional resilience? How do they learn to not think of their own emotions as problems to solve if we don't role model it? But it's a hard thing to do in grief. So it's worth doing. But yeah, it's a struggle for a lot of women.
Yeah, and asking for help and being vulnerable in that way too. I mean, there's so many things that we can learn from grief. Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/lastfirstdate to learn more and claim this offer. What is post-traumatic growth and how can people access it?
I love talking about post-traumatic growth because I find very few people have heard of it. It seems like everybody has heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, but when we hear about post-traumatic growth, our ears kind of perk up. So post-traumatic growth is a phrase that was coined in the mid-90s by a couple of researchers. Tedeschi and Calhoun were their last names. And what they were noticing is, and actually some of their initial work was about widows, they were noticing that after a traumatic event, and we could have a conversation about what that means, but traumatic in the eye of the beholder, right? Not a particular type of event necessarily, but something that an individual experiences as traumatic, that people would either go down in their level of wellness compared to before the trauma. They would come back up to the exact level of wellness that they had experienced before the trauma. And then there was this kind of other category of people who, instead of just bouncing back to where they were before the trauma, they were bouncing forward. They were reporting greater levels of life satisfaction, greater alignment with what they wanted, greater, happiness with life. And so post-traumatic growth really reframed the idea of what was possible after trauma, because before this, we really thought the best that could happen would be that we would bounce back to where we were. It was never really considered that we could take what happened, even if it were traumatic in nature, and use it to inform where we go in the future and actually live a life that's even more of what we want, even though this thing happened that we never really wanted or asked for. So immediately also, though, I will say, when people hear this, typically what we do in our culture is we're like, well, there's one more to do. I have to add to my list. Now I have to create post-traumatic growth, right? As if the loss weren't bad enough. And I never want people to hear it as a should or something they have to do. I don't believe it's morally superior. I believe it's just an option. I live in the state of Kansas and we have a lot of tornadoes here. So the way that I like to think about it is, if a tornado comes and knocks down your house, you're going to need to find somewhere to live, rebuild your house. You could just rebuild a house that's very close to the one you had. That wouldn't be bad. It wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be wrong. That it would just be an option. But if you had lived there for any amount of time, which we all have because we're humans, right? You probably learned some things about that house. You probably learned that maybe you would like more natural light in your living room. Maybe you want a different layout in your kitchen. Maybe you want to do things a little bit differently. And so you could take the opportunity, given that your house just got knocked down, to redesign it and make it even more of what you want. And doing so is not morally superior. Also, it is not a slight on the other house that you had. Building a new house with a different design doesn't mean you didn't love the old house, right? It doesn't mean there was anything wrong with the old house. It just means that you've learned some things and you're taking them into account as you go forward, which means, of course, for us, that we can experience greater satisfaction with life, deeper spiritual connections, improved relationships, right? New possibilities. Those kinds of things are possible for all of us. Not morally superior, not additional shoulds, just options for us if we want them.
That's a good analogy with the house. I think that one of the questions I ask the widows and widowers that work with me is, what did you love about your marriage? And is there anything that you'd like to do differently this time around? Because there often is. And, even though it might have been a great marriage and you love this person so deeply, maybe you didn't speak up enough. Maybe there wasn't an equal enough share of responsibilities. Maybe you left all the decisions around finances to your spouse and you didn't have any clue what was going on. These are all wonderful things that you can then intentionally look for and create in the next relationship that you're going to have.
Yeah. That's it, right? It's so simply thought of as just intentionally creating the next experience that you want to have. And why would we ever not use the information we gathered from all of the other things that we've done as we've been here on the planet? But then when we label it, and sometimes people make it mean something about the life they had before, or they put a lot of pressure on themselves. Well, now I've got to go out and do something grandiose. And no, that's not it at all. It's, can I take some stock? Can I decide, am I living in the way that I want to? And what would I like to be different if I can redesign it? Because I can.
Yeah.
Why not?
Pretty powerful, pretty amazing. So, what are 5 things that people can consider if they would like to date again after loss?
Dating again after loss. I would love, sometime we'll have to have a conversation about what you see, but so I like people to think about it. Not that, again, it's not right or wrong. But a lot of times we go into dating after a loss with the idea that there's a problem to solve and that dating will solve that problem. Right. So maybe we think that problem is the way that we're feeling. We think our feeling is a problem. And so in order to get away from how we're feeling, we think that a relationship is the answer to that. Maybe we're feeling insecure in who we are, and we have fallen into the patriarchal programming that says partnered relationships are somehow superior, right? So we're better off, we're of higher value if we find a relationship. So We go into a relationship expecting it to solve a problem, and it doesn't, right? I do a group coaching program, and one of the things I love about it is there's always somebody who did that and it didn't work out, and they're always right there to tell the story of how what they thought they were going to get out of dating, they thought it was going to solve other problems, isn't, because we're still humans on the other side of it. We still take our own thoughts with us, right? We're no better or worse because we're partnered. So in effort to solve a problem, it usually doesn't end very well. I also like to recommend that people do it because they want to do it, which I know seems like it should be kind of obvious, but very often in grief, people are being told to do it. Why aren't you out there again? You get back out there, get back on the horse. You should be dating again. You're such a prize. You're young, right? That you'll find someone else, but inside they don't really want to. So I want it to be something we want to do, not something we're being told we should do by people who care about us. And I think we need to be in a place where we're okay if people don't like it, especially for widows, because a lot of people won't like it. So maybe our former in-laws won't like it. Maybe our children won't like it. It's a much easier experience if we're okay when other people aren't okay with our decision to date. That happens a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a much better experience when we trust ourselves, to what you were saying earlier, where, we want to do things differently, but maybe we don't really know how. And so if we can do that kind of inner work where we have looked at what is it that I really want? What are the red flags I want to watch out for? And do I trust myself to say no when I see a red flag, and to not just go along to get along or people please, which again seems simple to do, but for a lot of us, it requires a lot of work. And then the last thing is really just knowing and liking your reasons, right? Knowing and liking your reasons to date. It doesn't mean you don't have to only date because you want to find a lifelong partner, right? Maybe you just want to date because you want to have some experiences. Maybe you just want to date because you want to see what it's like, right? Maybe you just want to date because you want to have some fun. But what are your reasons? Have you thought of them? And then do you like them? And if we do those 5 things, I think dating is so much more fun and so much less needy, less graspy. I personally, not that this is right or wrong, again, it's not, but I personally had no interest in dating after Hugo died. And I'd spent probably a good 3.5 years doing my own work before I decided I was even interested again. And by the time I decided I was interested, I was really in a great place. I could have taken it or left it, right? I genuinely didn't believe that my life would be better if I were partnered. I knew I was responsible for my own happiness. I trusted myself. I was okay if my kids didn't like it. And I think that's why it was such a different experience for me than what I see a lot of people going through.
Yeah, these are all great tips.
Thank you.
I have a whole section in my book about what do you want your dating experience to be?
Mm-hmm. Where was your book when I needed it, Sandy? Where were you?
I actually have a chapter on dating after loss because it is such an important thing. But yeah, it's like, how are you dating? What do you want out of dating? Like, a lot of people want casual. A lot of people want to just have an experience and have fun. And we have, again, this prescribed method of we must date to find love. And if it is not love, it is a failure. It is not true. And so I think when you get unattached to the outcome and you really do some of this inner work, you don't depend on dating to fulfill you, to complete you, to do all these things that we're told in society dating should be. And it just is, it's fun. It's like, it should not be a chore, another thing on your to-do list because somebody told you to do it. But I especially love that you say, be okay with other people not being okay. I think that so many people are waiting for permission, and I had that with my kids, even just after divorce, which is a form of loss, by the way, for anybody who's gone through divorce. And it's a whole new thing for children to get used to parents having new partners. And my ex-husband got involved very, very quickly with new women and introduced the kids right away. And so I was much more intentional and took several years. I was not interested in dating either for a couple of years. And I was running a business and a home and too many things. And I was really supportive of their emotional well-being as well, because they were going through a lot, which I'm sure you also had, on your
Yeah.
plate. It's a lot. It's a lot to
Yeah.
juggle. I mean, you don't want to put dating on top of that as I must date. You come in, you're okay. And some of my kids were not happy that I was dating. They all had different reactions, but I sat them all down, talked to them about it. And one of my kids was like, I never want to meet anybody. And I was like, well, I'll never introduce you to anyone unless it's serious. Like, this is not going to be a revolving
Mhm.
door of men that you get to know when you don't have any business getting to know them.
Yeah.
And so talking about their fears and all their concerns is also really important.
Yeah, agree. And I got kind of lucky in that regard, in that when I decided to date, and I realized this is not normal, but when I decided to date again, I literally went on one date and like it stuck. It was right before COVID, and we dated for about a month, and kind of the world shut down, and we decided to go into a little bubble. And like,
Wow.
yeah, I know, right? But I again, not to say that that is what has to happen, because I realize that it's rare, but I do think it was so much easier for it to happen, because as I'm going through online profiles, I was in touch with what I wanted. I was in a really good place for myself, and so I got away without having to have much drama there with my kids, which was nice.
Well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense also that when you do the inner work, and I tell this to clients all the time, you're really going slow to go fast.
Mhm.
So you take
Such
the
a great
time, you
way.
slow down, right? And
Yeah,
then
I
it's
love
like,
that.
oh, clicks.
Yeah, slow down to speed up. I like
Mm-hmm.
it.
So, Krista, what are your final words of advice for anyone who wants to go on their last first date, especially after loss?
Oh my goodness. Okay. How do I narrow it down? So here's one of the things I will say that just I think really helps. If you can go hold it loosely. Hold it loosely. No matter who you partner with, if you partner, whatever happens, you're still the same you. Your life will not be unequivocally better or worse. You will not be more valuable or less valuable, right? Your value is fully intact. So we can go into dating and hold it kind of loosely and have fun with it, right? Because nothing's really on the line. And so I know that's why I had such a lighter experience of it, is because I think that really sank in for me. And so if we could do that for ourselves, we could just lighten up, we could have fun, we could think about what we want to give instead of trying to, find something that we think we need. And it can just be way more enjoyable.
I love it. Hold it loosely.
Yeah.
Your value is not determined by whether somebody likes you or not, whether you get rejected or not, whether you find love with another partner or not. You are still you. And I love that. So, Krista, tell us, you have a free gift for our audience. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we didn't really talk too much about it, but one of the reasons that I turned to coaching in the first place is because I got stuck in this place that I now call a grief plateau. A lot of people are there, and your listeners might be there and not know that they're there. And what that's kind of like, or what it was like for me, is you're past the early days where it feels like your world exploded. You're kind of back to functioning, and people around you are telling you how great you're doing and how strong you look. But on the inside, you don't feel like you're loving your life, right? You don't feel like you want to feel. So you're kind of somewhere in this middle ground. And that's like where we fall through the cracks and nobody's helping us. There's so much help out there available for early acute grief. But I think it's really useful to know, am I stuck in that grief plateau place? And if so, how do I get myself out of it? So I have a quiz that they can take, and it's at coachingwithkrista, KRISTA.com/grief plateau quiz. And in 2 minutes, they can take this little quiz and find out if they are experiencing a grief plateau and how to get out of it.
Beautiful.
I wish somebody would have
And
given that to me.
yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
great. I think a lot of people stay stuck for a long, long time and don't
Yeah.
realize the options they have.
They just call it the new normal, right? We're told this, you're going to just get used to your normal. And so that they think, okay, well, my life isn't exactly what I want, but I guess this is what it's going to be now. And then we
Mhm.
stop dreaming and we stop creating, and we live this kind of mediocre, resigned life, and so much more is possible for all of us.
Well, you're a great example of what is possible.
Thank you.
And yeah, you've done the work and now you teach the work. And I think this is really, really important work. So please check out Krista's website, coachingwithkrista.com. Go download the free gift. And thank you, Krista, for coming on the show and helping us see that life after grief is possible, that post-traumatic growth is something that is possible for everyone if they do the work. There's a beautiful experience on the other side of grief, and that grief is, it's not just one thing. It is about experiencing your emotions and knowing that, grief is something that can stay with you, but you don't have to let it determine your life. And thanks everybody for listening today. If you love our show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.